As you may have noticed, there is not a sermon outline in your bulletin. And before I surprise you with what you're going to hear today, I'm going to do something that most preachers don't do. I want you to think about not where you're at right now. You know, most time we get into worship and we want to take and focus our minds and our thoughts just to this moment and forget everything else. But as I was looking at the lesson for today, I was kind of thinking about the idea of what are our thoughts about and why do we think about them? You know, when we look at it, we're going to see how it plays out here in a second, but think about today, not just the worship assembly, but from the time we wake up, what is our routine for today? What all do we do as we go through this day? You know, for this is the day that the Lord has made. You know, if we look at the rest of the verse that it comes from, let us rejoice and be glad in it. But what is it that we do each and every day? We get up, we have our morning routine. Some people have that morning cup of coffee to wake their eyes up. You know, what do we do? Even to get that cup of coffee, we go through a process. We go through coming here. You know, what are we going to do when we leave? You know, do we go out to eat? Do we go out and go to activities? What all is it in our normal day? And then the question is, why do we do the things that we do? Why do we come here? We kind of talked about last week with the idea of worship and the idea behind it, or the focus we should have about it. Are we here for that reason? Are we here to worship? Why do we do anything else that we do along the day? If we were to start coming here and we saw someone have a blowout right in front of us, actually was for one of the few moments this week that was on Facebook, I actually saw a friend of mine who had a blowout going down the highway. You know, he was able to safely stop and didn't have any major issues there, but if we were to witness something like that, would we stop? Even if we were trying to get here for services? And would we help them? You know, would we take and offer a hand to somebody in need? You know, I ask this because priorities were not always the correct ones in the time of Christ. So we're continuing in our look through Matthew. So we're at Matthew chapter 12. And we see where there is some issue with what is being done on the Lord's Day. Now, obviously in the Old Testament, the Lord's Day was the Sabbath day. It was on a Saturday. It was not our Sunday, our first day of the week worship. But the principle, I believe, is the same. And what we can learn about it, and why do we do the things we do on the day set aside to worship God. By saying it that way, it can affect for both the Old Testament or New Testament. They were told to, honor the Sabbath, to, set it aside for a very specific purpose. And as we look at the first verse, I want to ask, if we were in the time, now let's imagine ourselves back then, but if this morning, did you have breakfast? Did you make your breakfast this morning? You know, when you ate, did you just pick up something that was already pre-made and just eat it with no additions, no modifications? Didn't even put it in the toaster. I've already broken that one. I had a bagel this morning, I put it in the toaster. I didn't just take it out of the wrapper. I did something to get my breakfast. As we look at chapter 12, the first two verses here, we see that at the time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain to eat. So if we pluck a thing of grain or something off of the straight off of the out of the field, we can't just eat that directly. I guess you could. But you kind of break it up and try and get the grain pieces out of it so that you can just eat the grains and not all the husk and hull and all that. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." They didn't care that they plucked it off of the heads. They cared that they did something to try and make it able to be eaten. The real question here, though, was that really a sin? Is what they did a sin? Now, we think about it differently. Normally, farmers nowadays might get a little upset, perhaps, if we just walk into their field and start plucking out of the field and walk off with it. But in this time, this was their custom. The farmers were to, if it falls along the sides, leave it be. Don't fully take out everything. If it falls, leave it alone, so that others that are in need or passerbys could have something. But what are the Pharisees trying to say? If we look back at the reference of what they're talking about, it's actually Deuteronomy 23, verse 25. It's just this one verse. It says, when you come, this is Moses giving the laws from God. So this is coming from the source. This is not all the extra stuff that's been added by the religious doctrines of men and the things that are going on. So what the original was, when you come to your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the heads with your hand, but you shall not use a sickle on your neighbor's grain. If you're hungry, you can go pluck a little bit with your hands, but don't take your farm equipment and go out into their fields and start harvesting all their stuff for yourself. That's what the law says. Why are the Pharisees so wound up and so focused about trying to tell Christ what he's doing wrong? You're letting your disciples just eat the grain out of this field. Yeah. Kind of makes me think about something Jesus could do here is the same thing he did in Matthew 3-4 area where he's tempted by the devil. It is written. You don't, and we'll see how he answers it here in a second, but he answers them in two different ways about this one particular element. Yes, it's the Sabbath. You want to take issue with this, but not with other things? Let's talk about this. Verse 3, but he said to them, have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. Looking at the idea of the showbread, this what he's referencing is actually back in 1 Samuel chapter 21, where they were hungry. They went into the temple and took the showbread off the altar and ate it. It was designed, the purpose of the showbread, it was on the altar as a offering there for a period of time. After that period of time, it was to be replaced with a new loaf, and the loaf coming off, the priests themselves could eat, but nobody else. That was the law. But yet, he didn't take issue, the priests didn't take issue with that part. Kind of a this or that. Oh, you want to pick about this, but not about that. Verse 5 continues, or have you not read in the law that that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? I have a feeling if we go back and look at what the priests are supposed to do every Sabbath, they are to make certain offerings every Sabbath as part of their service. I have a feeling he's pointing out something else that they're not doing just right. They're not following the laws themselves, but yet they're quick to point out to Christ and his disciples, why are y'all doing this? When they're not even breaking the law, the actual law. Now, we might make all sorts of fluff and frills on top of it, and Christ is going to take care of that here in just a second. So the question is, on the Sabbath day, what is it that we're allowed to do? What is it that we are here for? What are we doing on this day? And what is our focus? Was the disciples' focus to be, fat and happy and fill their bellies and ignore God? No, they were hungry. They were trying to feed so that they could continue the day of service. So when we look at it here, what is our focus? When we come here to this building, are we coming here together because it's the building that we're trying to come to? Or is it what we are doing at the building? And the problem is how many people look at a building with more respect than what is being done inside of it. When you hear the statement come out of someone's mouth when they say something that they shouldn't say in the house of God, it's like, oops, I'm sorry, I'm in the church. I shouldn't have said that. Why does it matter? That should be a lifelong thing. Is what we say here should not be any different than what we say outside. But yet, for some reason, we make this building something more than it should be. At least some in the world do. And that's where verse 6 comes in. He says, "Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple." Now, he's out in the field, or right off the side of it. He's saying that, there is one better than the temple. They elevated at the time the temple to be the greatest thing under God. They did kind of put God right above it, but they kind of had a warped view about him anyway because of all the rules and everything that they would make. But it's the temple. And Christ says there is something better than the building. The place is of importance. He's not arguing that point, but he's saying there's something better. And this is where he hits them square between the eyes. "But if you had known what this means, I deserve mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." If you knew what it meant to say, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." Anyone can go and make a sacrifice. If we were in the Old Testament and we were told we had to go sacrifice a turtle dove, anyone can go sacrifice a turtle dove. All we got to do is get one. Anyone can make a sacrifice. Anyone can bring grain up to the altar and place it there and place the oils and the different spices. We can do that. It's just a matter of our feet walking one in front of the other, carrying the items and setting them down. Our heart doesn't even have to be in it to actually do the act of a sacrifice. But if we look at it with what he's saying there, it's like he desires mercy. Mercy is not an action we can just do without any feeling, without anything behind it. If we look at what he is, where he's referencing this from, he's telling them things of the Old Testament. He's telling them things of the other prophets. In Hosea chapter 6. All right, come on now, Jason. Hosea 6. Sorry. My eyes were going too far. There it is. Okay, so Hosea chapter 6, starting in verse 1. "Come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn, but he will heal. He has stricken, but he will bind us up. After 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will raise us up, that we may live in his sight. Let us know, let us pursue the knowledge of the Lord. He is going forth to establish as the morning. He will come to us like the rain, like the latter and the former rain to the earth. O Ephraim, what shall I do to you? O Judah, what shall I do to you? For your faithfulness is like a morning cloud, and like the early dew it goes away. Therefore I have honed them by the prophets, I have slain them by the words of my mouth, and the judgments are like that which goes forth. For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings." Hosea here is giving us several indicators of what is to come. He talks about the things that are, we might be broken, but God is going to heal us. We're going to die, but he's going to raise us up. Let us pursue the knowledge of the Lord. Let us not be like that cloud that just shows up and then disappears. The dew in the morning that just fades away. What is Christ saying? He's pointing back to Hosea saying, don't be like this. If you would understand what he said, you would see what you are in the mirror and be ashamed of yourself. You would see that you have such shallow faith and that you say words with no inside meaning whatsoever. You don't take them to heart, as we might say today. But the fullness of verse 6 there in Hosea 6, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. What are we doing and why are we doing it? For the Son of Man, if we go back to Matthew chapter 12, verse 8, it says, for the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath. What is the purpose of the Sabbath? The purpose of the Sabbath is to honor God. It is to take, and for us today, the first day of the week, is to honor and worship God. It is not about fighting amongst each other. It's not about nitpicking things or adding other restrictions and telling someone else they're wrong when I'm not doing right myself. Christ has just said that the Son of Man, the one who he just said a few verses ago, said that there is one greater than the temple right here. He is Lord of the Sabbath. They are not looking for someone who is a robot. We're not looking for, I'm doing everything perfect. We're looking for that heart, for that ability to do what is there. As he looks forward, they try and trap him in. So this is out in the field, and now where is Jesus even headed? Jesus and his disciples are going someplace. Now when they had departed from there, they went to their synagogues. They were headed to their place of worship. Along the way, they grabbed some grain, broke it open, and ate it. They had gotten so wrapped up in traditions and other things that when Deuteronomy says do no work on the Sabbath, they included don't start a fire as part of that. They've gotten to the part of if you put out a fire, that counts. But, wait for it, we can do some other things. You can't feed yourself. But as we read into here, now when they depart, and behold, there was a man with a withered hand, and they asked him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? The reason they asked is that they might accuse him of something. And then he said to him, so keeping in mind that you can't start a fire to get your hot cup of coffee, you can't take and break open some kernels of grain to eat, but in verse 11, what man is there among you who has a sheep, and if it falls into the pit on the Sabbath, will not grab hold of it and lift it out? You can't feed yourself. You can't help somebody else. You can't heal anybody. But if your sheep falls in the ditch, grab it and pull it out. We can take care of an animal, but we can't take care of each other. And Christ asked the question in verse 12, of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore, if it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath, therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. He's trying to get them to wake up. What do we do today? As we think through our daily routine, what is it that we do as we go through the day? Are we doing things that are good, that are promoting good? You know, there are certain professions that work on Sundays. There are others that we might elect to do work on Sundays. You know, we're not forbidden today to do any work, but what we do have to do is do good. Then he said to the man, and I like the way he did this here, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored as whole. If they're trying to accuse Christ of doing something, what did Christ just do? He did something without doing anything. He spoke a couple of words. He didn't touch him. He didn't do anything. There were different times, like on one blind person, he took and spit into some mud, put it on his eyes, and did something. This time, he just spoke a few words. Didn't even have to raise his hands up. They're going to be mad about this, that he just healed somebody, but yet, well, what did he do? Well, nothing. He's doing good on the Sabbath, on the day of worship. Should that not be something that we think about? Why is this such a big deal to them? I still haven't figured that out, except that he's not going with the grain. He's taking and doing what they know that they are supposed to be doing, and they are not doing it. He's shown them that they are not as clean and great as they think they are. Then they try and trap Christ, and they want to destroy him, and the Pharisees went out plotting against him, and Jesus knew it, and he took and withdrew from there. And we see that great multitudes followed him. I'm sure that didn't help with the scribes and the Pharisees any, because they wanted the multitudes looking at them. Christ was humble, he was meek, but he also said that he is the Lord. As Lord, that is a ruler, that is leadership, that is someone that is looked up to. And the people that had their eyes open and their ears open were. What is it that we choose to do in all of this? As they plotted this, great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all. In verse 15. He also warned them not to make them known, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah. He does all these things, and look at the attitude in which Isaiah portrays of this person to come. Isaiah is saying someone will come that is like this. My servant who I have chosen. First, Christ is to be a servant. And he sees that and he acts like one. He is the Lord, but yet he is also a servant. My beloved in whom my soul is well pleased, I will put my spirit upon him, and he will declare justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel or cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoking flax he will not quench. Now that right there, did some research on what that means, and we don't worry about that today because we just have a light switch. We flip a light switch and all the lights turn on. However, here we're talking about the idea of a lamp. When we have that, we think about it as the wick. When it starts to get old or frayed out, you just take and rip it out and throw it off to the side and replace it. Christ says you might be frayed, you might be brittle, you might be near end of life, but I'm not going to just throw you away. He will not break it. He will not just snuff it out. We can try and clean up those little frayed edges. If it's not burning very well, as we look at just a candle today, we can kind of clip some of the outside edges of it that are kind of hanging around and causing it to be ugly. We can try and clean it up and make it a nice, pretty, clean flame. By doing all this and having these attitudes, he sends forth justice to the victory, and in his name the Gentiles will trust. If Christ came acting like the scribes and the Pharisees, would anyone else ever accept what was being said? Christ came preaching to all, anyone, everyone. He talked to the sinners, he talked to the Samaritans, he talked to whoever was in his path. He let his message be open to all. And on any day, on any time, what is it that's in our day? Whether it's today, tomorrow, any day this week. What are we doing day by day? In our activities, do we follow that activities that Christ does? As they go through, he follows the law. He does what is lawful. They were lawful to be able to grab a hand of grain off of that rod to be able to eat. It didn't involve any work, but they tried to twist it in such a way that just breaking it open. If I were to reach into a bag of peanuts and break open that outside shell, according to the Pharisees, I just did work. Is that really the extent of what God wants us to do? People talk about, too many times we shortchange God by saying, by not following him all the way. In some cases here, we go overboard and put words into God's mouth. God said, focus on me. That was the focus of what he said. Focus on me. Focus on what I want you to do. For I desire mercy rather than sacrifice. I would rather see it in your hearts than see it in a vain, empty action. And the scribes and Pharisees still didn't understand because they tried to trap him with, well, what about healing this person? What about doing this? What about that? Christ said, look at your heart. He took and healed. He did the things that were supposed to be done. Will we stand up for what is right? Will we take and look and consider what is this day about? The day is not just about us. It's kind of ironic that they say that you can't heal somebody else. You can't feed yourself unless you've already prepared the meal the day before. But you can go rescue your sheep. Depending on what that little ditch is like, that's going to be a lot of work to get that sheep out. It'd have been a lot less work to make a cup of coffee this morning. So, where are our priorities? Are we really looking at what God wants us to look at? Are we doing, even in the midst of all this, they're trying to destroy Christ, and still Christ takes and gives them the simple answers and does what is supposed to be done? Do we do that in our lives today? For this is the day that the Lord has made. Do we follow the rest of that verse and say, let us rejoice and be glad in it? Be glad in it because we have the opportunity to serve. We don't have all these harsh restrictions on us today. Even in the Old Testament, they weren't supposed to be harsh restrictions. They just added stuff to it. Do we follow the words of Christ? Do we take and have that not just by words only, but also in our attitude and in our hearts? If we have need to evaluate that, let's think about that. Think about it inside of ourselves. If it's something that needs a Bible study with, we're glad to study. If it's something that we need to, pray about. If you have a need and want to make it known to the congregation, now is the time. If there's anything we can do, let us know while together we stand and sing.